I knew that my return home would be her last chance for happiness, and it was at that moment, when I saw her correspondence with another man, that my heart boiled with hatred, as if I were standing over the abyss, ready to throw her into the abyss. She had betrayed me by playing with fire, and now I decided that revenge would be my only consolation. Every night, while she watched me enjoy the bodies of prostitutes, I would remind her that I was the only one holding her life in my hands. Now she's not just a wife, but a toy, forced to endure humiliation while I wallow in my darkest fantasies, and I'm not going to stop until I break her completely.
Thank you for watching my channel. I create videos for your enjoyment. Please subscribe if you want to support my efforts, it's very important to me. I apologize in advance for any mistakes, dubbing is done by neural network. Please point out mistakes in the comments so I can correct them.
It all started, as it always does, with little things. Seemingly ordinary things that at first glance don't attract attention. The smile on her face when she read messages on her phone, her strange absent-mindedness at dinner, the slightly more frequent than usual delays at work. But I didn't pay much attention to it, at least not at first. Kate was everything to me, and I was used to trusting her unconditionally. A naivety that later cost me dearly. I didn't realize that one day, coming home from work a little earlier than usual, I'd see her like this. Sitting on the couch with her phone in her hands, she hadn't even noticed me enter. Kate was staring at the screen, her fingers sliding quickly across the keyboard, and I saw a strange smirk flicker across her face that I'd never noticed before. It was the first of many revelations that turned my world upside down. "Anything interesting?" I asked, trying to keep my tone innocent, but inside I could already feel something starting to squeeze me from the inside out. Intuition seemed to stir within me. Kate flinched, holding the phone sharply to her chest as if caught off guard. It was a reaction I'd expected to see, but it still struck me with its obviousness. Her eyes widened for a moment, and then her face took on a serene expression again. But that moment was clear enough to me. I knew I had caught her at something. "Oh, you're back so early." She tried to pretend that everything was fine, but I could feel the cold suspicion begin to pull me into its embrace. Kate stood up and placed the phone on the table as if she suddenly didn't care about it. It was one of those moments when you feel everything change. The smallest details suddenly become crucial. From the way she got up from her chair to the way she quickly looked away. Something inside me snapped. I could no longer ignore what I had so carefully avoided seeing. I quickly picked up her phone before she could say anything. Kate watched confused as I unlocked it. The first thing I saw was her last message. It was from an unfamiliar number, but the content spoke for itself. "I miss you. When will I see you again?" My gaze instantly pierced hers, and I felt the veins in my temples throbbing with anger. "What is it, Kate?" I asked, not hiding my tone. I knew this was the moment of truth. She was silent, head down, as if she hoped this was all a nightmare from which she was about to wake up. But this nightmare was real. My reality was crumbling right in front of me. "Paul, it's not what you think," she started, but her voice was weak and I knew she was lying. I didn't listen to her excuses. The phone in my hand continued to reveal dirty secrets I didn't even realize I had. There were more than just innocent messages. Every word, every emoticon confirmed that she hadn't just cheated on me. She had been cheating on me for a long time, dating someone behind my back, enjoying those encounters, making plans. When I got to the messages where they made arrangements to meet at hotels, I was disgusted. It wasn't just cheating, it was humiliation. I felt my world crumbling. Everything I knew, everything I believed in, turned out to be a lie. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" My voice sounded icy, and there was so much anger in it that Katya stepped back involuntarily. She didn't know what to say. It was obvious. Her every look, every movement betrayed her fear. Kate had always been sure she could control the situation, but now she found herself cornered. Thoughts swarmed in her head. They were dirty, violent, torturous. I couldn't contain myself any longer, feeling the anger rising from somewhere deep, like a fierce beast ready to unleash its claws. Kate had betrayed me, destroyed everything we had. The moment I realized that betrayal, something inside me snapped. There was no more love, no more pity. The only goal left was to humiliate her the way she had humiliated me. I wasn't going to forgive or reprimand her, wasn't going to find out what had gone wrong. All excuses seemed empty and pathetic to me. I wanted her to feel every second of the pain I felt when I found out about her cheating. Every look, Every move she made now brought out the disgust and anger that seemed to fill my entire being. A plan of revenge matured in my mind instantly. It was simple, but extremely painful for her. I was going to make her watch me betray her every day. Not just betray her, do it defiantly in her own home, in front of her eyes. And most importantly, Kate couldn't do anything about it. She was dependent on me financially, completely attached to our relationship, which was now a torture for her. I decided to act cold-bloodedly. If she wanted to play these games, I could play them too. The next day, after returning from work, I didn't keep quiet. I walked up to her as she sat in the living room and threw her phone on the table. "Do you think I'm stupid?" I asked, my voice icy. Kate went pale. She realized I knew everything. But instead of apologizing, she tried to justify herself. Babbled on about how it was just correspondence, nothing serious. I didn't listen. All her words were empty to me now. "You betrayed me," I said. "And for that you will pay." And she did. I sat in my bedroom and dialed the number of the agency in a cold, steady voice. There had always been rumors of such services, and now I didn't need to wait any longer. I wanted every minute of this evening to be hell for Kate. She had to feel as vile and humiliated as I had in those moments when I'd looked through her correspondences with another man. When I finished talking, Kate walked into the room. She noticed my phone on the nightstand, and something suspicious flashed in her gaze, but she still didn't understand. "Who was calling?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her sweater. "A friend is coming over," I said with a smile she didn't understand. It was a smile imbued with grim anticipation of what was to come. Kate tensed. She didn't know what I was up to yet, but she already sensed something wrong. Her heart was racing, and she couldn't help but notice how my tone had changed, how differently I was looking at her. But Kate couldn't leave. Financial dependency held her tight, and that knowledge gave me even more strength. About an hour passed, and there was a knock on the door. I got up and headed for the door, ignoring Kate, who was silently following me. When I opened the door, a young girl stood in front of me. She was quite pretty, well-groomed, with expressive eyes and a short tight dress that barely covered her hips. She was a young brunette in a tight short dress. She smiled at me on the doorstep, clearly used to these situations. I invited her in. Kate, standing at the end of the hallway, saw her, and there was concern in her eyes. I led the girl into the living room without explaining anything to Kate, as if she were invisible. "Sit down, make yourself at home," I said to the prostitute, waving my hand toward the couch Kate had just sat on. I watched my wife stiffen in the doorway, hesitant to come closer. Her face was pale, and I could feel the fear mixed with bewilderment growing inside her. But instead of saying anything or being outraged, she just stood there. I knew she was afraid of losing her financial support. It was her weakest point. When I sat down next to the girl, her hands immediately slid over my shoulders, her breathing hot and frequent. I didn't take my eyes off Kate, as if savoring every moment. She had to see it, had to feel that every gesture I made was revenge. Kate tried to take a step forward but stopped, her lips pressed into a thin line, and she suddenly turned to leave, but I stopped her with an icy voice. "Don't go, it's for you," I said, squinting, enjoying her torment. She froze. My cruel pleasure was reaching its peak, and I wanted that picture to stay in her mind forever. My fingers slowly slid down the prostitute's body. She was smiling, but she didn't care about what was happening. It was a job for her, but for me it was more than that. It was a moment of triumph as I finally regained control. I could do whatever I wanted to her, and Kate could only watch. Every look she gave me, every grimace of pain on her face gave me sick satisfaction. She endured. She knew she couldn't leave, that without me she was nothing. And that knowledge made her even more vulnerable. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You wanted to play? Now it's your turn to watch," I replied coldly, closing the door in her face. The night passed in horror for Kate, but for me it was a start. I wasn't embarrassed. I wanted her to hear and see every sound, every moan, every movement. Let her know how I felt when I found her correspondences. I repeated this several nights in a row. Each night I brought a new girl. Each night Kate was forced to watch me enjoy what she had lost. She tried to ignore, went into another room, but I made sure she saw every detail. My revenge became her punishment. The next day I did the same thing. I invited another woman over, this time a blonde, slightly older, but with the same cold stare of a professional. Kate sat in the living room silent, but I could see her hands shaking as she tried to pretend it didn't affect her. I entertained her for 4 hours in our bedroom, treating her to champagne, making her moan and scream my name across the apartment. So Kate would hear. So she'd suffer. Every night I did the same thing. New day, new girl, and each time Kate had to put up with it. On the third night, I asked out a brown-haired girl with green eyes whose confidence just radiated. Kate sat in the kitchen, eyes downcast as I led her past her into the bedroom. She didn't try to stop me, didn't make a scandalized face. She was completely broken. Every time the bedroom door closed behind me and the new prostitute, Kate was alone in the living room or the kitchen, somewhere in the background of our once cozy home that had become her personal prison. I could hear her sniffling, hear muffled sobs, but it brought out nothing but contentment in me. She had to suffer for everything. She couldn't leave, and that was the main instrument of my revenge. Kate had no money. In our marriage, I had always been the one who earned it, and she was used to living off of everything. She didn't work and she wasn't going to, because she felt like our money was her money. Her parents lived far away, didn't help financially, and her friends, they probably didn't even know what we had going on. I took everything away from her. She could no longer be the carefree woman she used to be, and I reveled in her helplessness. "You don't understand what it's like for me," she said through her tears one day as I walked another woman into the bedroom for the umpteenth time. I turned to her with a furrowed brow and replied with coldness in my voice. "Do you realize what it was like for me to read your correspondence? To see you planning meetings with another man while I'm at work?" Kate only sobbed, covering her face with her hands. She was cornered, and she knew she couldn't leave. She depended on me, on every dollar I gave her, on the financial security our marriage gave her. Now she had no job, no chance of getting out of this without my help. Every night I savored her silent suffering. At first she tried to argue, lashing out at me with rebukes, but I answered her in a calm tone, sure I was right. "It's just correspondence, Paul. There was nothing else." "But it could have been," I said harshly, looking her straight in the eye. "You betrayed me. And now you're paying the price." The sun was slowly setting over the horizon, flooding the room with orange light. I waited for her, knowing this night would be special. The fourth girl I'd summoned walked in, and everything about her was eye-catching. Her tight red dress outlined every line of her body, and her high heels lifted her to the ceiling. I caught her confident gaze as she looked around the apartment, as if this was her stage and I was just one of the audience. She came over to me, hugged me, and immediately began whispering playful phrases in my ear with a real spark in them. I could smell her scent, a mixture of sweetness and something a little pungent, and it added spice to what was happening. I couldn't wait to get started. Kate, standing in the kitchen, looked increasingly depressed. Her face was slowly losing color, and her eyes were full of rage and bewilderment as she looked at us. I knew her hatred for me was growing by the minute. I invited the girl to join me on the couch. She sat on my lap, put her arms around me, and began to slowly slide her hands over my shoulders. I watched Kate, feeling her anger turn to bitterness, and it filled me with delight. I pretended to be completely focused on my new guest, though in reality I was enjoying her misery. We started kissing, and I couldn't help but notice the way Kate clenched her fists and gritted her teeth, trying to contain her emotions. The girl, as if realizing what was happening, increased the intensity. She started stroking my chest and whispering words of tenderness. I grinned at Kate, who was getting more and more tense with each passing moment. I forced the blonde to continue. We were making love right in front of her, and I knew it was an exact hit. That evening, as the girl began to remove her dress, I could hear Kate barely holding back tears. The blonde was persistent and playful, and as she bared her body, I could feel Kate's growing anger and desperation just overwhelming her. I let her know that she should enjoy the moment, and then I just rubbed myself against her body, hugging her so that Kate could see that I was thoroughly enjoying this play. The girl and I continued, and every sound, every moan, every movement only increased Kate's agony. I watched the distorted expression on her face. It was pleasure turning into torture. I could feel the tension building in the room, and it was just beautiful. I leaned over to the blonde and whispered in her ear, "Turn her on, let her hear how much I love you." She smiled and started working even harder. I felt like a lord, and my revenge filled every cell in my body. I made her act so that every phrase resonated with what Kate was feeling. I laughed as the blonde began to pop my champagne, and in turn, I tried to tease Kate even more. When we were done, I stayed on the couch with the blonde, and looking at Kate, who was overcome with utter despair, I just grinned. This was just the beginning, and I realized that enjoying my revenge had become a pivotal moment for me, from which there was no turning back. The morning brought me new desires. I knew there was always some comfort behind the evening's pleasures, and I wanted to continue. This time I summoned another girl, a blonde with bottomless green eyes and perfect forms. She walked into the apartment as if on a catwalk, and her confidence was infectious. She looked at me with a flirtatious smile and whispered, "I'm here to make your night unforgettable." "Again?" she asked quietly, not taking her eyes off the floor. Her voice was lifeless. "Yes," I answered dryly, not feeling the least bit sorry. Tonight would be business as usual. Kate, who clearly understood what was going on, sat in the corner, full of anger and hatred. Her lips were trembling, and her face expressed only one emotion, horror. But I was determined to keep going. The blonde immediately came over to me, put her arms around me, and began kissing me gently. I knew Kate was watching and couldn't look away, and that was my greatest pleasure. I made the girl follow my every command that night, and her every move only emphasized how deeply I was enjoying the situation. She became provocative, undressing slowly as if it was a show. I continued to lead her, reminding her that Kate was just an observer with no right to interfere in our game. I was filled with pleasure and laughter as the blonde started doing everything I dreamed of. She and I started kissing, and I let my hands slide over her bare skin. I felt like a great master. I had complete power, and it filled me with pride. The blonde wriggled under my touch, and every moan that came from her was like music to my ears. I looked at Kate, and I could see tears in her eyes that she was struggling to hold back. I knew she was reliving every second of it, as if I was stabbing her in the heart. I wanted her to feel helpless, to know that her expectations and hopes were shattered. The blonde started whispering in my ear about how much she liked what was happening, and I responded in kind, as if this was our private world from which Kate was excluded. After we had satisfied our desires, I discerned Kate almost gasping with rage and fear. I wrapped my arms around the blonde, tucking myself into her hair, while Kate looked at us as if we were something horrible and incomprehensible. I savored this picture, realizing that revenge had become my only solace. I knew that these moments would be forever etched in her memory, and that was what I wanted, to destroy her hopes and dreams for good. The next day when I woke up, I was overwhelmed with satisfaction. I remembered how the blonde from the party I had called the night before had whispered in my ear how much she loved having her here, increasing my anger and my wife's rage with each passing moment. That simple thought added to my confidence. I'd cheated Kate again and again, robbing her of her trust and shattering her world. I called the prostitute again. This time I chose a girl with gorgeous red hair and bright green eyes. She walked into the apartment and I couldn't help but smile. Her confidence reminded me that I was on the right track. I felt like a lord again, able to control other people's destinies. She had a perfect silhouette that made my thoughts wander into a world of endless pleasure. As she approached me, I noticed Kate still suffering in the background. I paid attention to her shocked face and felt the adrenaline rush from it. She couldn't leave me. Her financial addiction kept her firmly in this house. I, in turn, was using that addiction as best I could. I leaned into the red-haired girl and she smiled back, realizing that this was a game in which I was the master. The evening was becoming more intriguing by the minute. The girl and I were laughing, cuddling, and I was making her behave so Kate could see how good I felt. I led her into the bedroom, where soft pillows and warm light created an intimate atmosphere. I kept glancing at Kate, her gaze full of fear and bewilderment. I knew it was hurting her, and that only fueled my excitement. When the red-haired girl started to undress, Kate tried to turn away, but it was impossible. I told her, "Look, you have to see what's going on," and that only added to her misery. I got her totally enthralled. She became more provocative, and I felt the blood rush to my face with excitement. As we began, I suddenly realized how pleased I was with what was happening. It was more than just physical pleasure. It was the sweet pleasure of revenge that I was realizing with every passing second. I leaned into the girl, and as if in response to my challenge, she began to squeeze me even harder. I could hear Kate sighing, trying to hold back tears, and that only added to my strength. That evening, as the red-headed beauty danced around me, I couldn't keep from laughing. I lifted her in my arms and whispered words of admiration, feeling like a true king whose wife just had to put up with it. Something more was building up inside of me. I longed to continue destroying her soul, to bring her to the point of no return. The next day, I wondered how far I could go in my revenge. I called in a new prostitute, a girl with a short haircut and a sassy look who could be the center of attention at any party. When she walked in, her confidence was mesmerizing and I felt the excitement engulf me once again. She quickly realized what was happening and immediately accepted her role. Again our gazes crossed with Kate's, and I noticed the anger intertwined with despair in her eyes. This game of using others to hurt her was becoming a real addiction. I wasn't just getting revenge anymore, I was savoring the process, every moment as her world crumbled before my eyes. The girl began to do everything she could to loosen the atmosphere. She came over to me, lay on her knees and started caressing me without distracting Kate. I laughed as the girl whispered playful phrases in my ear, and Kate only clenched her fists. "You'll never leave me," I whispered in response to her mute question, for it was true. I made the prostitute do everything she could ever dream of with me. I enjoyed every move she made, every look she gave me, and it only fueled my desire to continue. I stood up, reached out and hugged her so Kate could see everything. I couldn't help the pleasure as her lips touched my skin, as her hands slid down my body, and I felt so strong while doing it. That night I whispered in the girl's ear that she was gorgeous, while Kate herself in the corner looked increasingly depressed. I could see the hatred sparking in her eyes, and it gave me strength. I knew it was her own fault that she was in this situation, and that was fine. I had the girl touching me, wrapping her arms around me, and she could barely contain her laughter in response to her movements. When we were done, I stayed with her again, looking at Kate, her face contorted with anger and despair. I was sure that my revenge was not only physical pleasure, but a powerful weapon that could crush everything she had ever known about love and trust. I knew I had left scars in her heart that would never heal. Kate looked at us again, and I felt so happy, like I had accomplished my goal. I was finally able to break free from her clinging embrace and enjoy my freedom. I was a master at this game, and every moment of vengeance filled me with the feelings I had longed for. I knew her suffering was my reward, and as I looked at her, I savored my victory. The next day was a turning point. I could no longer tolerate the spectacle. When I got home in the evening, I already knew it would be the last night I would bring anyone. Everything was already losing its meaning. Kate sat in the same spot in the living room, her pale face devoid of emotion. She wasn't even trying to look at me anymore. I felt that I had achieved my goal, and now there was only one thing left to do to complete it. I didn't summon another girl. Instead, I sat down across from Kate and looked at her carefully. She didn't immediately notice my gaze, her attention focused on the blank TV screen. I waited until she looked up. "What?" Her voice was hoarse from recent tears, and there was nothing but tiredness in it. "It's over," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I can't take it anymore. You have to leave." Kate looked at me with a puzzled expression, as if she hadn't realized what I meant. Her eyebrows furrowed, and for a moment I saw in her eyes the same spark that had always attracted me to her. But it was only a moment. "Do you want me to leave?" Her voice trembled, and there was a hint of fear in it. She knew she had nowhere to go. Knew she had no money, and this house was her last refuge. "Yes," I nodded, feeling no regret. "You can pack your things and leave right now. You and I have nothing else." Her face turned white as chalk. She got up from the couch, trembling, and stepped closer to me. I saw her hands trembling, and for a moment I even felt a faint pity. But it was fleeting. "Paul, you can't do this," her voice broke into a scream. "I have no one. I can't leave." "You chose this path," I replied coldly, rising from my chair. "You betrayed me, and now you're reaping the consequences of your actions." Kate cried, tears streaming down her cheeks, but I couldn't see it anymore. I turned away from her and headed for the door, opening it wide. "Out," I said, pointing to the exit. Kate stood at the door, tears streaming down her face. She seemed confused, devastated, as if the very thought of leaving scared her out of her mind. Her legs seemed to be unsteady, and she staggered, but she made no move to leave. I could see her hands shaking, her fists clenching and unclenching frantically, trying to find words, but nothing came out. Fear, dependency, and helplessness were in her gaze. This moment should have been the culmination of my revenge, but now all I felt was a strange emptiness. "Paul." Her voice was weak, broken, pleading. "Please. I have nowhere to go. I've lost everything, but I can't leave. I'm dependent on you. Without you, I'm lost." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She really was totally dependent on me. Money, a roof over her head, even the ability to get through the next day, it all rested solely on me. Her life was in my hands. When I started my revenge, I didn't think it would go this far. Now there stood before me a ruined woman, all her pride evaporated like morning fog. She was willing to endure any humiliation to stay in this house. It doesn't matter, I said harshly, suppressing my pity. You knew it would end this way. Did you think your betrayal would go without consequences? Her gaze dropped to the floor. She knew my words were true, but she didn't seem to want to accept it. She opened her mouth a few times, as if she was trying to say something, but fell silent again, staring at one point. I can't take it anymore, I continued, taking a step forward, forcing her back toward the door. I'm tired of seeing your face every day. You're ruining me with your presence, Kate. Just go away. And don't try to change anything, it's over. Kate sobbed, struggling to lift her head. Her eyes were red with tears, and her face reflected her pain and fear of the unknown. She realized that I was serious, that there was no turning back. She lowered her arms. It seemed that her strength had finally left her. Where am I going to go? She finally said it quietly, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. I have no one. Her words hung in the air like a heavy stone. I knew she was right. She'd cut herself off from her family for me, and her friends were long gone from her life. I'd left her with no way out. That's not my problem, I said, averting my gaze. Your actions led you to this. And now you have to pay the price. Kate took a step toward the door, her steps slow, like she was walking into an abyss. She cried again, but this time her tears were silent, like someone who had already accepted defeat. I stared at her, trying to keep my emotions under control. But something trembled inside. Was it pity? Or the realization that my revenge had gone too far? She put on her jacket, slowly zipping it up. Her movements were mechanical, as if she were acting on inertia. When she reached the door, she turned around, taking one last look at me. I loved you, she said quietly, and there was no reproach in her voice, only bitterness. But now I know I've lost you forever. I did not answer. She lingered in the doorway for a few moments, as if hoping that I would change my mind, that I would reach out to her. But that didn't happen. A few seconds later, I slammed the door shut, cutting her off from our lives.